assembly that we had. Honestly, Rabbi Beta and Rabbi Levy and Mr. Galper and Mr. Rockport for this, and Marcel, of course, for making this happen. What today's assembly is about is introducing Josh Warhit, who's sitting right in the back. He came to speak to us today from Stand With Us organization, which is basically an organization that works with strengthening and supporting Israel around the world, and making sure that everybody's educated about Israel and always supporting Israel. How I'm involved with this organization is that I intern for them, and Josh is my mentor for the Northeast region. And I work with other high school students, like our age mostly, mostly in our region, but also around the country, to educate people in our schools, in our communities, and making sure that everybody's educated and supporting Israel. He helps me plan events and make sure that we stay on top of what we need to know about Israel. He came to speak to us today about his experience in the IDF. He served in the IDF during Operation Protective Edge in 2014, 2 summers ago, and I'll tell you more about that. And he works for Stand With Us now, so he's very involved with advocacy, and he's here to teach you what to say, how to respond to important questions, and how it will be difficult for us next year, God willing, when we go to college, and how to make the most of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Flatbush. Thank you for having me on this wonderful February morning. I hope everyone had some coffee. We're not used to, in the advocacy world, 9 a.m. presentations, but at the end of the day, what has to be said has to be said, and I'm ready, and I hope you guys are too. Sarah, thank you for the introduction. Just by a show of hands, who had heard of Stand With Us before Sarah's introduction? You, my dear, what's your name? How do you know about Stand With Us? Thank you, Rebecca. Facebook, that's what most people say. We're very big on social media. Right behind the IDF for second, as far as pro-Israel posts go. By the way, this is supposed to be interactive, so feel free at any time to raise your hand. There'll be time for questions afterwards, but I assure you there's no bad time for questions. Just raise your hand and I will call on you. If I am speaking, however, please do not speak, as we have a lot to get to and not so little time. In so little time, I should say. My name is Josh Warhit. I'm the Northeast High School Coordinator for Stand With Us. Sarah, your description was wonderful. I'd like to add that as an Israel education, we are an advocacy organization. We're also an education organization. What does that mean? Education, in my mind, means open dialogue, gaining a more comprehensive picture of the situation, of Israel, of the Middle East, of the conflict, all these complex issues. Unfortunately, in today's world, we see a lot of misrepresentations of Israel, about the IDF, about Zionism. And Stand With Us started 14 years ago in our current CEO's garage in Los Angeles. It's now become an international sensation, offices across the country, across the world. We have one in Midtown, New York, dedicated through programming and resources and our high school and college fellowships, to countering these misrepresentations, to countering the boycott efforts we see too often on college campuses, and to standing up for a comprehensive truth, seeking the Israeli perspective, the Palestinian perspective, gaining a wider picture. And I encourage you afterwards, take my card, feel free to be in touch. But for now, I'd like to talk a little bit about my background, how I got into Stand With Us, and then how to answer some of the tough questions that you may experience going forward, whether on college campuses or in the media or elsewhere. So, where does my story begin? Not too far from here, actually, New Rochelle, New York. Who's heard of it? Upstate, I know. That's what they used to tell me when I came to the city. A little bit upstate, right up Metro North, New Rochelle, New York. Pretty standard childhood. I didn't grow up in a particularly religious household. Very strong Jewish identity. But, you know, in other ways, pretty much a normal American upbringing. If kids weren't able to look at my face, they wouldn't know I was Jewish. But they were, so they knew. Loved baseball. Loved all sports, really. Loved movies, loved books. Nothing pretty spectacular. Every summer I'd go to summer camp. Not a religious camp, but it was a Jewish camp because everyone was Jewish, but you know, that was pretty much it. And when I was 16, I decided it was time for a change. No one in my family had ever been to Israel. And for my bar mitzvah, I got more into my Jewish identity. I was obsessed with this ancient community. I knew I was a part of it, but I didn't have the upbringing that many of you did. with an intimate connection to our ancient language, to our ancient scriptures. That wasn't something I had, and it's something I wanted. And another aspect of our identity, everything with the Jews is ancient, another aspect that I didn't really know intimately was our ancient homeland. The reason we're called Israelites is because we come from Israel. Don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise. The reason we're called Jews is because we're from Judea. And that's something I wanted to experience firsthand. So when I was 16 years old, I went to Israel for the first time. And like many of you, I fell in love with it. Who here has been to Israel? Who here has not been to Israel? Don't be ashamed. First chance you go for it. I highly encourage it. I fell in love immediately. I fell in love with the falafel. I fell in love with the Hebrew, a language I didn't speak at the time, except for Amen and Hanukkah. Slowly but surely, it got a lot better. But at the time, I fell in love with it, something I didn't know. I fell in love with the food. I fell in love with the chutzpah. Who can describe what chutzpah is for me? I don't mean that as condescending. There's no direct translation in English. Yes. Audacity, I like it. I don't think there's an English word that directly translates, but that's as close as it gets. Audacity. Saying what you want despite anyone else's effort. I fell in love with that. More than anything, I fell in love with the chayalot, the female Israeli soldiers. Why did I fall in love with the female Israeli soldiers? You wonder, guys, I was a 16-year-old boy, okay? This isn't complicated. But it was beyond that, guys. It wasn't just an issue of being a 16-year-old boy. It was going to the Middle East, a region that we know is not famous for human rights and equality, especially when it comes to gender. And I saw out of high school girls or young women, they were 18, joining their brothers on the front lines, in combat units, in intelligence units. This was something spectacular. I wasn't an expert on world geography, on world history, but I knew the Middle East was not a bastion of love. It was a bastion, unfortunately, of baseless hatred based on gender and ethnicity and religion, something that our people, unfortunately, have felt disproportionately. And all of a sudden, I saw a bastion of democracy. Not a perfect country by any stretch, and I never intend to get such a perfect message across. Israel is not a perfect country. It needs to be improved. That's why I criticize it every day, and I'm proud to say that. But as far as the Middle East goes, this was something spectacular. And I fell in love with it, and I kept going back and going back. Every year to volunteer, to study. My junior year of college, I studied abroad in Haifa. I urge you to study abroad, by the way, if you get a chance. Haifa, Israel's third largest city, up in the northwest corner. I call it the San Francisco of Israel. It's very diverse, culturally active. On campus, every day I saw protests by this group, Zionist Jews and Arab Christians and Arab Muslims and nationalists and communists and capitalists. And I fell in love with it. Not with any particular ideology. I mean, I'm a huge Zionist, so I guess I lean more towards those. But just the fact that they were happening. It was a testament to Israeli democracy. Our people returning after 2,000 years of exile to our ancient homeland, after being submissive for 20 centuries, 18, I suppose. After being submissive. They kick us out, some of us survived, let's eat some food. That was considered a success for us, and a reason to celebrate a holiday. Not anymore. With Zionism, we see self-determination for the Jewish people in Judea, for the Israelites in Eretz Israel. And not only that, we've established a democratic country that respects human rights. And I decided I need to be a part of this 100%. So after graduating college, I moved to Israel. I made Aliyah to a kibbutz called Urim. I don't know if I have a light. No, I don't have a light. Right between Beersheba and the Gaza border. And I enlisted in the Israeli army. I decided the fact that I wasn't born there has nothing to do with community. At the end of the day, I was part of the global Jewish community. And community is about taking care of each other. And when necessary, defending each other. And I was able and I was willing to take up arms. And I joined the Israeli Defense Forces. And I was proud to say, this will come up later, the first piece of literature before I put on my boots that I received, I carried around in my wallet every day. It's called Ruach Tzahal, the spirit of the Israeli army, talking about the values that we hold, whether it's Reut, which I guess you could consider brotherhood, but it applies to both men and women. Camaraderie, I suppose. Personal responsibility, purity of arms. This was the first army for a Jewish state in thousands of years, and I was very proud that it was holding itself up to the values that we hold dear here in the United States and many other Western democracies. I went through anything and everything with my fellow soldiers from all over the world, all different backgrounds, rich, poor, urban, rural, north, south, religious, secular, Jewish, non-Jewish. My friend Yaron from Ethiopia, my friend Nisim from France, he just got engaged, Mazal Tov. My friend Yedidia, who's of Yemenite origin. I was the goofy American kid. And it was a challenging experience, both physically and mentally, through the long marches, through carrying the stretcher, through doing the obstacle course, through nights sleeping outside when it's very hot and very cold. But at the end of the day, we were setting out for the same mission, no matter what background we came from, and that was defending our people, defending our country, and defending the people in its borders, Jewish and non-Jewish alike. Now, my second year of service was much more enticing when I speak about it than the first. I spent 7 months in the West Bank, biblical name Judea and Samaria, the heartland of the Jewish homeland. If you read the Tanakh, this is where most events are going to be taking place between the time that the Israelites entered the land of Israel and the exile. When did Israel start controlling the West Bank? Does anyone know? Sorry? If you're wrong, it's not a big deal. 1967, very good. The Six-Day War. Jordan entering the conflict against Israel's warnings. Unfortunately, Jordan had a pact with Egypt and Syria, and they were determined to overcome the embarrassing moments of 1948 and get rid of Zionism once and for all, get rid of Israel. Jordan entered that conflict, and 6 days later, Israel found itself controlling the West Bank. Since then, it has been the heart of the contest of land disputes between Israel and the Arab nations and the Palestinians. And right now in the West Bank, we have Jews living there, we have Palestinians living there, a very tense atmosphere. And as a soldier, Israel controls the West Bank militarily, and as a soldier, I found myself in the middle of it. And in the West Bank, I experienced, I shouldn't say a paradox, but a challenge that Israel faces that I'm not sure you can do perfectly. Because Israel, as a democratic Jewish state, faces two imperatives. One, security. It has to uphold security like any moral democracy would. Two, human dignity, which means respecting the human rights of all people it affects. In the West Bank, you have many scenarios that you would think are black and white. I'll give you an example. Arrests. You know these arrests happen. Arresting terrorists, arresting people who are affiliated with Hamas, a militant terrorist organization dedicated to the destruction of Israel. We have other groups as well, Islamic Jihad, planning attacks all the time. Boom, very easy. You're going to arrest the bad guy. What's the big deal? You're going to be defending your citizens. When are you going to arrest the terrorist? What time of day? Sorry? Nighttime. You can do it in the middle of the night because you know the person's probably going to be home. Who else is going to be home? Guys, his or her family and kids. All of a sudden, you're barging in. The wife or husband is screaming. The kids are frantic. They're going to hate you forever because all they remember is a soldier coming into their house in the middle of the night to take their mommy and or daddy away. It's not an easy existence. And this is something that Israel faces from the top, from the Ramatkal, the head of the army, all the way down to the infantrymen at the bottom. Checkpoints. Checkpoints happen all the time. What is a checkpoint? Does anyone know? Go ahead. What's your name? Yeah, you were raising your hand, no? It's all good. Anyone have an idea? Yes. Very good. So it's a defensive measure initiated by Israel, increased during the Second Intifada, a bloody period of terror about 10, 15 years ago, whereby Israel is able to check people coming into Israel, out of Israel, also within the West Bank. You have set checkpoints, you have makeshift checkpoints, you can make one in 5 minutes, and this is something as a soldier I experienced all the time. Again, security and human dignity. On the one hand, I feel it's imperative to defend my citizens. If that means checking people who pose a threat, so be it. On the other hand, I understand Palestinian frustration. People having to sit waiting for these checkpoints for many minutes, perhaps hours, every day. In the sweltering heat, in the cold, it's not an easy situation. But I guarantee you, Israel is doing it better than any country has even ever tried to do it. Some people will say there's no prize for most moral army in the world. I disagree. I think there's very much value in that. In 7 months in the West Bank, I experienced many orders, one of which went against these values. One did. I'll tell you what it was. We wanted to practice urban warfare. They wanted us to practice urban warfare to get better equipped at it. And they said that we were going to go into Nablus. Nablus is a Palestinian city. The Hebrew name is Shechem. Who's the first person to settle Shechem in the Bible? Sorry? Yaakov. Yaakov settled Shechem. Someone said Joseph. Joseph is buried there. But Yaakov is the first one to settle Shechem. Today it's a Palestinian city, 0 Jews. We have Jews living on the outskirts, but only Palestinians live in the city. And they wanted us to go into the city and use someone's home for practice. Not shooting or anything like that. Chas v'shalom, God forbid. We're talking about setting up a lookout with binoculars, something you would do in a war. What's the problem with this morally? Guys, it's some shlemazel in the house. We all know what shlemazel means? We have a good Yiddish background. No, not a Yiddish background. A shlemiel spills the soup, a shlemazel gets the soup spilled on him. Okay? Someone with bad luck, like mazel, shlemazel, like shlivi mazel. Guys, some shlemazel lives there, not a terrorist, no one who's done something wrong, probably, just someone with bad luck. This to me was an invasion of privacy, and it went against the very values, purity of arms that I learned about on my first day. And I knew this was a moment of truth, and I told my commander, his name is Duvdevani, I love you, there's no way I'm carrying out this order. You can tell your commander, and that's it. I was risking jail time. That's mutiny. That's what happens. I was risking my combat position, something I wanted for years. I was risking everything. But I knew I would have to live with my decision for the rest of my life. And he told his commander, v'chule, v'chule, etc., etc. And eventually, I called their bluff. I was a good soldier. I knew that. They didn't want to put me in jail. They kept me on base. And at the end of the day, they didn't even carry out the order themselves. Why? Because someone up there, I don't mean in the Shemayim, I mean someone with a higher rank than me in the army, knew that it went against these values. This is what I'm talking about. From the lowliest infantryman to the head of the army, these values are being considered every second of every day. Is Israel perfect? No. Is the Israeli army perfect? Of course not. But it is making a strenuous effort to upkeep both human dignity and security. Now after the West Bank, I thought, oh wow, I have all of this experience, I'm going to go talk about it at Flatbush, yada yada yada. I thought this was the peak of my experience. And all of a sudden, what happened in the summer of 2014? I heard it. Scream it, Tzuk Eitan, exactly, Tzuk Eitan, Protective Edge, Operation Protective Edge. We have Hamas controlling the Gaza Strip. Hamas, a militant Islamist organization, you can read its charter. I'm happy to send you some copies. They are unabashedly anti-Semitic and anti-Israel, calling for the genocide of the Jewish people. Unfortunately, since 2005, Hamas has controlled the Gaza Strip, and beyond thousands of rockets being launched into Israel, what was the new threat we experienced in the last couple of years from Gaza? Tunnels, you've heard it before, you've seen it before, you've seen the pictures, you know, if you've seen Shawshank Redemption, we're not talking about some rabbit hole underground, we're talking about well-financed, millions of dollars, well-lit cement tunnels. Going underground, 100 feet underground, into Israeli communities. The Israeli government doesn't go to war easily, guys. It's risking the most precious gifts that its voters have. It has a selfish incentive not to go to war because it's risking the children of the people voting for the government. They are held very accountable. Unfortunately, with this situation, no matter how strong the Israeli Air Force was, it couldn't reach these tunnels underground. We needed to send in the infantry. We needed to send in my friends and myself and other units to destroy these tunnels and destroy Hamas, or destroy its infrastructure as much as possible. And that we did. Summer of 2014, we go into Gaza. The fighting was heavy, thick urban environment, and a very difficult task because we had to find tunnels. This is an example of a few tunnels coming from the Sajawiya neighborhood just east of Gaza City. What is the challenge with these tunnels from this picture? Sorry? So the green line refers to an armistice line between Israel and the West Bank. So green line does not concern you. But the green line on the map, I see, I'm sorry. The physical green line that you see on the map, the border between Gaza and Israel, yes, they go into Israel, that is a challenge. We're not talking about something that gets close to the border, we're talking about something that's posing a threat to Israeli communities, literally under their feet. What else is challenging? Where are these tunnels starting? Very good. What's your name? Rachel is absolutely right. Guys, they're starting in hospitals, in mosques, in schools, and unfortunately in UN buildings as well. This was our challenge, to get rid of the threat, while the threat is using human shields. It's actually mastered the art, unfortunately, of using Palestinians as shields. And I guarantee you, we are not perfect, and we probably did not conduct ourselves perfectly, but we made every strenuous effort to do so. I have with me a souvenir. I like to take souvenirs wherever I go in the world, even if it's to Gaza. And beside the olive trees on my way out, I picked up one of these. It's one of a million flyers, over 1 million flyers, leaflets that the Israeli Air Force dropped, warning Palestinian civilians in the Gaza Strip where the fighting was going to be taking place. This one is actually from after the ground incursion, telling them that it was okay to return to their homes. This is not just an example of how Israel cares about people on both sides. It's an example of how much Israel cares. Because by dropping these leaflets, what was it doing that was dangerous? You're giving Hamas a heads up. You're not just telling civilians, you're telling your enemy when and where it's going to be taking place. My friend Eitan, or Ethan in English, Eitan Barak, Zichrono Libracha, was the first Israeli soldier to fall in this operation on the first night march into Gaza. The sun sets, you're in Israel. The sun rises, you're in Gaza, and one of your friends is no longer there. 20 years old, if I am not mistaken. It's not an easy thing to live with. But at the end of the day, I'm proud that the country for which I was fighting decided to implement this strategy. Security and human dignity. Unfortunately, we experienced extremely heavy fighting. Our battalion, we experienced dozens of injuries. A few of my friends, unfortunately, did not make it back as well. But we completed our goal of destroying the tunnel infrastructure as it stood at that point. Unfortunately, Hamas is continuing to build them. And over the last year, I'm happy to say we've had the quietest year on the Gaza border since the 1970s. I'm telling you this story because when I was a senior in high school, who here is a senior? Everyone. Anyone not a senior? Snuck into the class. Woo. When I was a senior in high school, I loved Israel. I went off to college. I went to the University of Rochester, freezing cold, upstate New York. Beautiful place if you happen to go. And I went with this passion. But I didn't take with me the tools necessary to stand up for Israel. I was part of the Israel Club, I was in AEPI, I was in Hillel, I did Chabad. I was super Jew on campus. But when posed with the tough questions, I didn't know what to say. I got that terrible, you have the good butterflies and you have the bad butterflies. The patparim tovim and the patparim ra'im. I had the ra'im. I had the bad butterflies in my stomach when I saw on Facebook claims of apartheid, of genocide. I didn't know what to say. And after a few years on campus, and certainly after my experience seeing firsthand the complexities of the Middle East, hearing Palestinian dialogue, Israeli dialogue, seeing settlements, seeing war in Gaza firsthand, I hope this is something you never have to experience. But it did give me the firsthand knowledge necessary to stand up for Israel with confidence, with bitachon etzmi. And that's why after returning, I joined Stand With Us, because I wanted to talk about this experience and talk about this knowledge with the most important people I could possibly do it with. If you want to talk with people who are writing big checks with their suits, you join another organization. That's not who we talk to. They might write the checks, but they're not creating policy. The people who are creating policy 10, 15, 20 years from now are sitting right in front of me. And that's why it's imperative that if we're going to criticize Israel effectively, but stand up for Israel effectively, we need these tools. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to answer some of the tough questions that we've gotten. Now, before I continue, are there any questions up to this point about the Israeli army, about my experience in particular, about Gaza, about the West Bank, about anything? Yes, what's your name?
Eli.
Eli, go ahead.
All right. You said you didn't agree with when you were going to somebody's house, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, why don't you agree with the tunnels being hospitals?
Let me elaborate. Hey, guys, he asked a question. He asked a question. I didn't mean to say I was okay with it being in the hospital. That's the opposite of what I meant to say. If I didn't say that clearly, I apologize. The fact that these tunnels by Hamas were coming from hospitals was an egregious crime against humanity. Conflating civilian territory with military is a crime against humanity according to every consideration of international law I've ever heard, and against Jewish values, Western values, anything like that. I showed that as a challenge that we had, because on the one hand we wanted to destroy this infrastructure, on the other hand, in order to do so, it unfortunately involved many civilian casualties, because it was placed right near civilians, right near the wounded, right near the young, and right near the old. So I was absolutely not okay with Hamas tunnels originating in these places. I was just showing how much of a challenge it was for us to destroy these tunnels. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yes.
It's okay. Anyone else? By all means. Okay? So when it comes to answering tough questions about Israel, unfair criticism, we want to be able to differentiate between the fair criticism and the unfair criticism. Stand With Us has employed a strategy called the 3Ds. It's something that Ton Sharansky of the Jewish Agency believes in. Guys, I need your attention, please. Yes, Sarah. Oh yeah, I know. Don't worry. I was told ahead. Someone presented the 3Ds here, no? Very good. That's why I'm not going to, the 3Ds presentation is a whole hour. I'm not going to give that to you. I'm just going to review. Who can tell me one of the Ds? Demonization. Very good. Leading to isolation, elimination. We see this picture, Israel being demonized as Nazis, attacking innocents. That's the Palestinian representing innocence. What we don't see here is a more comprehensive view. What we're talking about at Stand With Us. We see a narrow view. We see something that's very tzad. Why is it narrow? We don't see anything about human shields. We don't see anything about rockets. We don't see anything about Hamas's charter. We don't see intentions. We don't see anything. All we see is Israel being demonized as a Nazi. Delegitimization, someone shouted it out, telling you you have no rights. As Americans, or if you're Canadian, or if you're Australian, or if you live in any Western democracy, you are considered legitimate. You have rights. Right to free expression. Right to political representation. Right to self-defense. By suggesting that Israel has no rights, one is delegitimizing the state of Israel, erasing Israel off the map, telling us a country you have no right to exist. And of course, what's the third D? The most important, if I may say so myself, double standards. We see countries like Mauritania with 20% of its population being slaves on the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. On the other hand, we see a majority of resolutions going against the one democratic country of the Middle East. We know this is a double standard, we know it's unacceptable, and we know it's hurting two groups of people. It's hurting the Israelis, and it's hurting everybody else who's being oppressed in the world. Because all the efforts that are supposed to go into the correct values of the United Nations, the implementation of these values, all those efforts, unfortunately, are geared in the wrong direction. So, as far as being able to answer the tough questions, if you know how to differentiate, that's one step. And I know here at Flatbush, you already know how to differentiate between the fair and the unfair, which is unfortunately often anti-Semitism. At Stand With Us, we employ a strategy called ARM. Who has heard of this strategy? Beautiful. You better have said it. You better have heard this strategy. Address, reframe, message. Sorry? Oh. Are there any questions, by the way, about the 3Ds? No problem. Guys, I promise there'll be, if you have a question, just raise your hand. Address the question. You're going to validate some portion of the of the person's argument, if you can. If somebody comes up to you and says there are no chairs in this room, there's nothing to validate. The person is wrong, and you have to say, actually, there are plenty of chairs. But if there's something worth validating, you do it. Why do you do it? Guys, please, enough with the chit-chat. Thank you so much. Any ideas? Why do you want to validate what someone is saying? Yes? Because by listening, it's not going to be in one ear out the other. If we're preaching, if I'm going to stand up here and preach open dialogue, I have to practice it, and we all do. As advocates of Israel and advocates of anything in life. If you go to law school, you'll see that if you're not willing to hear the other person's argument, they're not going to hear yours. And if we want open dialogue, if we want learning, this is what we have to do. Reframe, that's going to be the meat of our discussion. 2 or 3 facts, perhaps a personal story, to get our message across. Turning the accusation around in your favor. And of course, ending on a positive note. We don't want to end on the facts, we want to end on hope. Because you validate at the beginning to bring the person in, you send the person off with an inspiring message. Just to give an example, dogs are better than cats, nothing to do with Israel. Somebody comes up to you, dogs are better than cats. Now, personally, I am a dog lover, but for the sake of this argument, I'm going to be addressing this claim as someone who prefers cats. It's true that dogs have many advantages and are often considered man's best friend. However, that's bringing the person in. However, cats have many advantages that need to be considered. They make for cuter Instagram pictures. They're more independent, they pee and poo on their own. And at the end of the day, they're much better snugglers. Snuggling with a cat, snuggling with a dog, cuddling, whatever. At the end of the day, I hope that dog lovers and cat lovers can cooperate and appreciate the benefits of their respective pets and live in harmony. Does everyone understand the ARN method? Who wants to give it a try? Facebook is a waste of time. So who wants to do the opposite? Sarah, you want to go for it? Oh, hold on. We're going to give one of your classmates a try. No, come on, please! Everyone give her a round of applause! Stand up, please. Hold on, shh. Everybody, go Kings. Guys, please, enough with the chit-chat, please. Yeah?
And yeah, you could remember your friend's birthdays by Braverman.
Now finish it off with a message.
Okay, so my message to you is that Facebook is not a waste of time and everyone should.
Give a round of applause. Guys, on this side of the room, the girls have been magnificent, the guys have been great, but just lagging a little behind. Please keep the chit-chat to a minimum. I promise after this presentation, I won't bother you. You'll be your teacher's problem. Or if you're skipping school, you'll be your parent. Guys, what are some thoughts, criticisms? Was it good? Was it bad? What do you think? It was very good, by the way. What was missing? What could have been better? Message could have been crisper, okay? I'll tell you one thing. At the beginning, don't start with, it's true that Facebook is a waste of time. You can validate it without directly confirming what you know to be false, because you're making the opposite argument. It's like saying, Israel is brutally murdering Palestinian children. You don't start by saying, it's true that Israel is brutally murdering Palestinian children, but I understand that many people spend too much time on the internet these days. Something like that. But, as you mentioned, it's a great place to store your photos. It's a great place to show people what you're doing. As if they care. Just kidding. It's a great place to reconnect with old friends. Tell a personal story. This is a true story. I was in Anaheim, California. I posted a picture at Angel Stadium. A friend of mine from college, I didn't even know was living in California, saw it, and we got coffee 2 hours later. It's a great way to keep in touch, and it's something that creates social movements that would not be possible otherwise without this human communication. Finishing on a positive note, it's my hope that people learn to use the internet with perfect balance and can see and experience all the advantages of Facebook firsthand. Are there any questions? Okay. Then let's, before going on, 2 quick things. Words that work in your message. Be sure to stay positive. Hope, children, future, dream. You might think it's corny and stupid to infuse all these words into your answer, and it is stupid. But it's not stupid to infuse some of these words and to stay positive. Other words not up here. Dialogue, self-determination, moderates. These are words that send the person off with a positive message and inspire them to ask further questions. But the right kind of question. Has anyone heard of the 10-80-10 methods? Or 595? I actually prefer 595. I believe the amount of people in the middle is much larger. For those of you who don't know, we approach our peers as a bell curve. And most people on any given issue are going to be in that middle. That middle hump that goes up. They're curious about Israel. They're not sure. They like Israel, but they want to learn more. Or they're completely indifferent. These are the target audience. Because on the one side, you're going to have 5%, 10%, probably smaller, that love Israel no matter what, that went to Flatbush Yeshivah, that are rah-rah, and they're worthy of dialogue, but at the end of the day, they're on our side already. On the other hand, you're going to have people who hate Israel, claim it's apartheid, don't care. They support the Intifada, and no matter what you tell them, unfortunately, it's in one ear, not the other. That's not our target audience. We're happy to have dialogue with those people. We want to normalize and to engage them in discussion. Those groups on college campuses, by the way, have what's called an anti-normalization policy. They will not engage in dialogue with Zionist groups, and if they do, they lose their funding. But as individuals, we hope that they can engage us. But at the end of the day, we want to engage the 80%, the 90% in the middle. And this is something to be considering when you're answering these questions. So to give an example that has to do with Israel. Innocent women and children are being murdered, let's say in the Gaza Strip. This is something, who's heard something like this? Seen something like this on Facebook? Given you those bad butterflies, those paparim marim I was talking about. The first stage is not to say, get out of my face, no cursing, no yelling, we're keeping our calm and cool. Because to do otherwise is to give an impression of being on the defensive. And we don't want to be on the defensive. We want to be proactive in answering these questions. People are dying on both sides of the conflict. This is an unfortunate fact of war, but the death, I should say, of innocent people is always a tragedy. Empathy. Immediately starting with empathy. Drawing the person in. But you have to hold your ground. Israel has the right to defend itself. It's not a complicated matter, and there's no reason to complicate it. Since 2001, over 17,000 rockets have been fired into Israeli territory by Palestinian terrorists. If the root of this terrorism based in the Palestinian territories were not destroyed, Israeli civilians would continue to be vulnerable. Perhaps you give a personal story about something you didn't, or about a friend, or about a story that you heard. Draw the person in and reinforce your message with something firsthand. But you don't want to end with bloodshed. In an ideal world, there will be no radicalism and no terrorism. If people can live in harmony, if we can destroy this base of terrorism, I should say, then we won't have to worry about producing this empathy because we'll already have peace for my children and for yours. What are some of the positive words we see in this message up here? Children, hope. Peace. Harmony. Future. Future is a positive word. Very good. 5. It's not random. It flows. Are there any questions about this example or about ARM in general? Very good. Settlements. What are we talking about when we talk about settlements? Yes. Please. That is a valid point. The question is, what about human shields? Why not bring up human shields? And the reality is, with these questions, you don't always have a lot of time to speak, and there are many different directions you can go. There's another question later on that I think I would bring up human shields, but you can definitely use it here. But this was more of a general answer, just to give people a clear picture. That's absolutely, very good picture. Settlements. What are we talking about when we talk about settlements? Nobody knows? I'll take that as a hand raise, right there. The man in the black kippah. I know that's not very descriptive here. What is a settlement? Yes, you. I'm looking right at you. Eye contact is very useful. Unbelievable. Any of the ladies? What about the West Bank? Wake up, smell the roses. Yes, what are we talking about? What is a settlement? Yes, my dear. Guys, please, if you don't want to answer the question, that's one thing. Please respect those who do. Yes. Guys, please, I'm not going to talk over you. Very good. What's your name? Danielle? Danielle, thank you. The territories we acquired in the West Bank, particularly, we're talking about the Jewish communities in those territories, called settlements. They're often painted as the obstacle to peace in the Middle East. Now, when answering this question, settlements are the obstacle to peace. To me, that's a narrow view. I saw settlements firsthand for 7 months. Many of you have visited family or friends in settlements, I'm sure. And when you see the complexities of the Middle East on the ground, you can appreciate the idea that no matter what, settlements are an issue. Whether you see them as good, whether you see them as bad, there's something that will be discussed in negotiations. That will be discussed in order to paint what is a complicated picture. The problem is, there are 1,000,001 variables. And to suggest that settlements are the cause of the problems is overlooking things that must be addressed. So we talk about why they're not the issue and what is the issue. Gentlemen, please. If settlements were the obstacle to peace, when Israel left Gaza in 2005, uprooting every single Jew living there, we would have had a flourishing port alongside the Mediterranean. Instead, we have a launching pad of rockets by an Islamist militant totalitarian regime. We have the opposite of peace. The issue is that Palestinians are being ruled by both corrupt and extremist leadership. The issue is that we have incitement of 12, 13, 14-year-olds to stab and shoot Israelis. This indoctrination of hatred is the core issue at hand. We can't end on bloodshed. Palestinians should not be persecuted by their own leaderships. Talking about this leadership is the issue, and then reflecting a message based on that issue. If Hamas can be removed from power and replaced by moderates, we can sit down and have negotiations and discuss peace. Yes, Sarah. Well, listen, there are going to be advantages for Israel to having settlements, whether economic or military or societal, or perhaps just a connection to the ancient homeland. There are going to be advantages, but this question is not saying the opposite. If this question said settlements are not in Israel's best interest, again, perhaps a valid argument, you could respond by saying, actually, they provide A, B, and C for Israel. But that's not what this question is saying. This question is saying they're the obstacle to peace, and thus our refrain should address that claim. Okay? Who wants to give it a try? I'll give you 10 imaginary points. Yes? No? Any volunteers? There's no wrong answer. Come on, we got one over here. It was beautiful. None of the gents. I need a hand. Not worth it. I love the brave souls. Sarah Torgman, my lovely intern. Israel uses disproportionate force against the Palestinians. What are you going to say to that? Everybody, please. Give me a message. Finish up with a message. Hold on one second, Sarah. I'm sorry about that. Continue. Just a message at the end, please.
In the future, I wish and I hope that we can live in peace and we won't need so much security to live side by side.
Thank you so much. Round of applause, please. Somebody noted that it was difficult to hear. I should have given her the microphone. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. It wasn't you. It was the people who were trying to talk over you. Thank you so much for the answer. Guys, bringing up the fact that they're using disproportionate. We see these buzzwords used to demonize Israel, talking about the 3Ds. Apartheid, genocide. Disproportionate force is one of them. And what I like to do, because it does two things. It can embarrass the person, and it could win my argument. Just ask. That's very interesting that you use that term. What do you mean by disproportionate force? If the person knows what it means, then you've already won your argument. Because and if they don't, they look foolish. Disproportionate force has to do with how much force you're using as compared to how much you actually need to use to carry out a mission. It has nothing to do with how many people are dying on one hand and are dying on the other. In World War II, I guarantee you, many, many, many more German babies were killed by American airstrikes than the opposite. Yet no one in their right mind would ever consider that part of an argument as to who was right, the Nazis or the Allies. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Disproportionate force, Israel, if anything, it's disproportionate in the other way. I'm going to talk about how a peer of mine ran 17 flights over the same building, yet didn't carry out one airstrike because it was determined that too many civilians were being used as human shields in that particular building where a rocket launcher was. I'm going to talk about how before a grand incursion into Gaza, Israel offered 11 ceasefires to Hamas, all of which were rejected or broken shortly thereafter, etc. These are the facts we need. We need to show the world that we're not the Syrian government, that we're not Hamas putting out pamphlets on how to use human shields. While they're putting out those pamphlets, we're instilling our soldiers with Western democratic values that include respect and Jewish values that that reflect respect, I should say, for human life. It's my hope, and this is where I'm going to bring up the human shields, in that reframe exactly. And I'll even bring it up in the message on the opposite end. It's my hope that Palestinians and Israelis have a better future in store, and we can accomplish this, by holding both sides accountable. Unfortunately, we haven't seen that accountability thus far, and Palestinian leadership in the Gaza Strip still insists on using human shields. And then going on about how we want a better future for our children and youth. I know it's cliche to say, guys, but I would do it every time in anything. Israel uses its weapons to defend its citizens, and Hamas uses its citizens to defend its weapons. The Middle East is not a black and white issue, and there are imperfections on both sides, but as far as human shields go, that statement is 100% in Israel's favor. The only thing disproportionate about this conflict is how many charters call for the complete annihilation of the other side. And that's Hamas 1 and Israel 0. Are there any questions about this claim in particular? Nope. 5 minutes. Just kidding. Millions of your tax dollars are being given to Israel to continue their humiliation of the Palestinians. Are there any brave souls? No brave souls. Yes, the U.S. gives aid to Israel. It also gives aid to many allies, including the Palestinians. Whether that's an ally, many different peoples around the world. Israel does not take aid to humiliate people. It takes aid to defend its citizens from terror. The U.S. gives this aid because Israel is a natural ally. The joint projects between the two countries have produced immeasurable results, environmentally, militarily, developing cures for diseases in the medical field, helping Americans and people all over the world. It's my hope that we strengthen this relationship. Imagine what we could do to produce even more results, to create a better world, a more peaceful world for the next generation. Again, the same format, it's a little more wordy, but allowing us to turn the accusation around. Instead of being on the defensive about the aid that Israel receives from America, we should be proud of that relationship. We should stand up and yell it at the top of our lungs. Yes, we have this close relationship, just like Hamas has a close relationship with terrible countries. America has a great relationship with a wonderful country, and its name is Israel. Now, there's one more example I want to go over because it's something that, unfortunately, is one of the buzzwords we hear most often on college campuses and in many places. It's something Sarah knows very well from our fall conference, from her programs that she's run, from the materials that she's gotten. Israel being an apartheid state. Just like with disproportionate force, we insist on a definition. Who knows what apartheid is? Yes. Different rights for different people. And where was that implemented? What's the famous example? South Africa, yes? Okay, geographically I'm not sure, but as far as within society, pockets in society, absolutely. Guys, the white minority in South Africa subdued the black majority in every aspect of society, just like she said. No political representation, no integration whatsoever, not nearly the same healthcare, not nearly the same education. Every budget was significantly lower. We do not see any such system in Israel. Here there is nothing to validate. Israeli Arabs have equal political representation, and there is no such apartheid system. Does that mean there's no discrimination? Of course not. Is there prejudice in Israel? You betcha. It's something that Israelis have to work on. But that is not apartheid. And unfortunately, with every country that experiences problems, for some reason, every issue in Israel is made into an existential problem. It's exaggerated to the point where we're using demonizing terms out of place. As an Israeli Jew, your doctor, your lawyer, your barber, and your best friend can all be Arab, and there's absolutely no problem with that. We have members not just of the Arab parties in Israel, but of the Zionist parties in Israel who are Arab. We have Supreme Court justices who are Arab. If we want to look at apartheid in the Middle East, look elsewhere. Look at gender apartheid in Saudi Arabia or in Iran. This is where we see the real separation in the region, and it is quite ironic that the term is only used to describe Israel, or that it's used to describe Israel at all. Turning it around to create a positive message. It's my hope that more countries in the region mimic Israel to make their own societies more inclusive, Only then can peace be achieved through mutual recognition and respect. Guys, going forward, you're going to see these buzzwords. And I'm not trying to fearmonger here, whether it's on campus or anything, your lives are going to be 99% wonderful. You're going to have ambition to go forward and be the person you want to be. You're going to make friends, you're going to get an education, more of an education, I should say. You're going to become the people that you want to become. There is that less than 1% of the time when you will experience, perhaps, challenges like this. And I urge you, for your sake, for the sake of Ahavat Yisrael, to be, this is not a burden, this is an opportunity. I assure you, getting involved with Israel advocacy is not a burden on the shoulders. It makes you a more interesting person to yourself, to your peers, to everyone you associate yourself with. And I encourage you, be in touch with us, with me, with anyone from Flatbush, with Sarah, who's a resource, for programming, for resources, for materials. And that should help lead you on your way. So with that, I thank you for having me this morning. I thank you for your patience. And have a lovely day. Thank you, Ray.